Here is our lesson on factoring trinomials, and hopefully you guys like this meme. So our learning goal today is students will be able to factor the greatest common factor, which is the GCF, of a polynomial, and factor a trinomial when a is equals to 1. So today we're going to investigate pretty much about factoring. So definition. Factoring, finding what multiplies together to get an expression. When factoring polynomials, it is similar to reverse multiplication or undistributing. So we're going to take a look at these couple examples on the bottom to see like what visually factoring looks like, okay? So when we multiply these two, we distribute. And when we distribute, we get 6 times x is 6x, and we get 6 times 2 is 12. And then for part B, you guys, when we multiply, we distribute this 3x to each term inside the parenthesis, and we get 3xy, and then negative 4 times 3, you guys, is negative 12, and don't forget the x. So that is just simply just multiplying, right? Just distributing. Now let's take a look at factoring, right? We can all agree that this is just one singular expression, right? But based off the definition of factoring, what makes up this one expression is what we call our factors, all right? So, and we've in the definition, we also saw that factoring is pretty much reverse multiplication or dividing and undistributing, right? So when I look at this term, you guys, 6x, and I look at 12, I have to think, well, what is something that I can divide 6x and 12, right? What can go into both of those numbers? Well, a 6 can be divisible by 6, and a 6 can also go into 12, right? So if we factor out a 6, we gotta do reverse multiplication or division, right? So 6, if we take out the 6, which we already did, right? So that means this divided by 6 is just gonna give us 1x. And 12 divided by 6, you guys, is gonna give us 2. And if you guys take a look, this is one part and this is another. And remember, the definition of factoring is what two things multiplied together will give you the whole expression. And the two factors of 6x plus 12 are 6 and x plus 2. And those are our two factors. So let's take a look at the next one. Well, here we have this, correct? Well, what do they both share in common? Well, I can see there's a 3 and a 12, negative 12, right? So we can factor out a 3 from both of those. And you guys take a look, they both have an x term, right? So you can also factor out an x. So we can factor out a 3 and an x. Now focus on the purple that I circled, right? Well, what can both 3 and negative 12 be divisible by? 3. 3 divided by 3 would give you just 1, and negative 12 divided by 3, you guys, would give you negative 4. Now, do you guys see how they both have an x term, right? So we already took away an x from both terms, so there's no more x's anymore, and all that will be left here is just a y term, because we factor out a 3x from both of these terms. So again, factoring is pretty much finding multiples what two things that multiply together to give you an expression, and the way to find factors is by reverse multiplication or undistributing, which is pretty much dividing each number by a common thing. So, the next part is GCF, and this is, you guys, your greatest common factor. Your greatest common factor. So, first step in factoring is to find out the GCF, the greatest common factor. So, anytime you guys do factoring in the future, you always have to figure out if there's a GCF. Now, what the GCF is, this is the largest integer and highest degree of each variable that divides each term evenly in a polynomial. So you have to figure out, for the numbers, what's the largest integer that I can factor out from each term, and for the variables, it's a question of what's the highest degree that you can factor out from each term, evenly in a polynomial. So let's investigate, right? Example 1, A through F. Factor out the GCF of each expression. So, let's take a look at this. Well, look at the variables, you guys. There's an x and there's nothing, right? So we can't factor out a variable because this one doesn't even have an x, right? Doesn't have an x term. But look at the numbers, right? There's a 5 and a 30. So you can factor out a 5 from each term. And if you factor out 5, now how do you know I can factor out 5? Because I know 5 can go into 5 evenly and 5 can go into 30 evenly. So 5 divided by 5 is 1, so it's just 1x for just x. And 30 divided by 5, you guys, is 6. So that's the two factors are going to be 5 and x plus 6. Let's take a look at B. 4x squared minus 28x. Alright, so look at the variables, you guys. There's an x squared and an x, right? So how many x's can you take away from both? Well, since this only has one x, you guys, and this has two x's, the most amount of x's you can take away from both of them is an x. That's the only thing that they share between the two. It's just one x. Now, let's look at the numbers. There's a 4 and negative 28. So what can 4 and negative 28 be divisible by? Well, the biggest number is 4. So we're dividing each one by 4 and taking away one x from each. 4 divided by 4 is 1. We took away an x from here, you guys, so that's just going to leave an x there. Minus 28 divided by 4, you guys, is 7. And we took away an x from both of them, so no more x because it already got taken away. And we get 4x times x minus 7. See? When there's a negative in front of your polynomial or in the first coefficient, generally you always want to factor out a negative number if the leading coefficient is negative. So what can we factor out? Well, I'm looking at negative 2 and negative 30, you guys. So I'm thinking, okay, what number can I factor out from both negative 2 and negative 30? A negative, because it's in the leading coefficient, and a 2. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2 from both. So if I factor out negative 2 divided by negative 2 is positive 1. So this is just going to be a positive x, you guys. A negative 30 divided by negative 2 is going to be positive 15. And there's the factors for that one. Negative 2 and x plus 15. Alright, so we have D. Okay, so when I'm looking at this, you guys, well, I can't factor out an x because this doesn't even have an x. Now, I'm looking at negative 3, negative 30, and 12. Well, since this is leading coefficient has a negative number, we gotta pull out a negative sign. So what can go into negative 3, negative 30, and 12? What do each of those numbers, what can they be divisible by? And the answer is 3. So we can factor out a negative 3 from each one. So now let's divide each term by negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is positive 1, so that's just going to be positive 1 x squared. Negative 30 divided by negative 3 is positive 10. Don't forget the x term. And 12 divided by negative 3, you guys, is negative 4. And there's our 2 factors. So all we're doing is just pulling out the greatest common factor. Part E, okay, there's an x squared there, there's an x, and there's an x. So they all share an x. Now that means I can factor out an x from each term. How many x's? Well, these only have one x, you guys, so the only thing is we can only factor out one x from each. This has a y, this has a y, this does not have a y, so that means we cannot factor out a y, because in order to factor, each one has to have that same quality. Now let's look at our numbers, right? 2, negative 10, and 16. So what can negative 2, 10, or 2, negative 10, and 16 all be divisible by? They can all be divisible by 2. So we're going to factor out a 2x from everything. 2 divided by 2 is 1. We took away an x, remember? So we're just going to have an x and a y. Negative 10 divided by 2, you guys, is negative 5. We took away its x, so no more x, and there's the y left over. 16 divided by 2, you guys, is 8. So plus 8. We took away its x already because we factored that out. So all we're left with is xy minus 5y plus 8. And lastly, f. So we can't factor out this one, you guys, because there is no number that we can divide evenly into negative 5 and negative 2, and this one has an x term, but this one doesn't. So this one is not factorable. I mean, you could factor out a negative 1 if you want to get rid of the negative sign in the front, but that one is not factorable. So this is some good practice for you guys, and remember, make sure you write down on a scale from 1 through 5 how you feel. 1 meaning you are struggling and don't understand how to do it, and a 5 means you have complete understanding how to do it. So I will be checking that, so make sure you guys are consistent in making sure you self-assess yourself, because it will help you in the long run and when you guys come in for tutoring and for your guys' tests and quizzes. Okay, so in class, so we did some doyos, so you can try these on your own, but your answer for these are negative 2. You can factor out a negative 2 and a y from each one, so you would get x squared minus 10. For number 2, you can factor out a 3 from each one, so this one would be 3 times 4x plus 7y minus 10. So that would be factoring out a 3. That's the greatest common factor. And for this one, the only thing you guys can factor out is a 5 from each one, and you would have gotten this. Again, make sure you guys practice those on your own so that you guys get a feel for, but that's what we did in class, all right? And again, self-assess yourself, because this will be huge when you study for tests and, you know, come in for tutoring and ask for help, so that I have an understanding of what you do get and what you don't, and you yourself will be able to get that as well. Okay, next, these are the steps for factoring trinomials, okay, which is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, we can factor these type of quadratics, these are also called quadratic functions, when the leading coefficient is 1. So, you multiply the first, I'll spell it out, the first and the third coefficients together. Make sure your quadratic equation is in standard form, f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are real numbers. Now, these are the steps, you guys, okay? So you're going to make a factor list of whatever number you get from multiplying the first and third coefficients. Now you play the x game, where you have to ask yourself, what two numbers from your factor list add up to give you the second coefficient? If you can't find the two numbers, then it is not factorable. It is not factorable by using this method. And if you do find the two numbers, then your factors will be x plus the first number and x plus the second number, or vice versa. So let's take a look at some examples to see what exactly I'm talking about, right? So example 2, we're going to factor each trinomial. So everyone watch, right? So first, let's identify what's our first, second, and third coefficients, right? If you guys forgot what coefficients are, it's the number in front of the variable or the constant. So for this one, you guys, a is equals to 1 because there is a 1. If there's nothing written there, you guys, for a variable, that means it's automatically 1. This coefficient, you guys, it's negative 6. Not negative 6x, negative 6. It's the constant or number in front of the variable. And then this one, you guys, the third coefficient is negative 40. So, let me show you guys how to do this x game, alright? So you guys draw an x, a big X. On the top, you are going to put the multiplication of the first and third coefficient, which is our a and c value. So, well, what is our first coefficient? Our first coefficient is 1, you guys, and our third coefficient is negative 40. So what's 1 times negative 40? Negative 40. And what is our second coefficient? Our second coefficient, you guys, is negative 6. So this is how you guys set up your x game, alright? So here's the game. Now, you have to figure out, well, what is our factors of negative 40? Well, our factors of negative 40, you guys, are 1 and 40, plus and minus 2 and 20, plus and minus 4 and 10, plus or minus 5 and 8. So these is our factors list, okay? These are our factors list. Now, here's the game. Out of all these numbers from our factors list, which one of these will add up to give you your second coefficient, or your b value, right? So let's see. Well, plus those together, that's 41. Subtract them, that's 39. Does that add up to give you negative 6? I don't think so, so it can't be that one. What about here? Well, 2 plus 20, you guys, is 22. Subtract those from each other, that's negative 18 or positive 18. That's not negative 6. What about 4 and 10? 4 plus 10? That's 14. But if you subtract them from each other, right, you could get positive 6 or negative 6. And this is negative 6. So, if we put, okay, 10, and if we put 4 and negative 10, you guys, this works, right? Just stare at it, right? Isn't 4 times negative 10 negative 40? Right? That's true. And isn't 4 plus negative 10 negative 6? Yep, that's true. So those are our factors. And lastly, if you do find two numbers, then your factors will be x plus the first number and x plus the second number. So our factors for this, you guys, is going to be x plus 4, and since this is minus 10, it's going to be x minus 10. And this is our factors. Remember, factors, when you multiply two things together, it should give you this expression. So the factors of that expression, you guys, are these two getting multiplied together. X plus 4 is one factor. X minus 10 is the other. Okay, so here's how we do the x game a little bit faster. This coefficient's 1, the second coefficient's 3, and the third coefficient is negative 70. Well, our first and third coefficients multiplied together is 1 times negative 70, so this is negative 70. And our second coefficient, you guys, is our b value, which is 3. So here's the x game, right? What two numbers multiply to give you the top, but when added together gives you the bottom? Well, let's get our factors list going, right? Plus or minus 1 and 70, plus or minus 2 and 35, plus or minus, not 4, 5 and 1, 14, and plus or minus 7 and 10. So I have all these factors of a times c combined, right? Which is negative 70. Which two of these combinations will give you positive 3? And there's only one option. It's this one. If we had negative 7, you guys, and if we had positive 10. Stare at that, right? Negative 7 times 10, you guys, is negative 70. Negative 7 plus 10 is positive 3. So this is correct. So that means our factors are x minus 7 and x plus 10. And theirs is our two factors, x minus 7 and x plus 10. Okay, speeding it up. C. Again, x method, right? I'm writing down my coefficients. Notice I keep on writing down my three coefficients. Our first and third coefficient, a times c. 1 times 12, you guys, is 12. And our b value, our second coefficient, goes to bottom. What two things multiply to give you positive 12, but when you add them together, it gives you negative 8? Well, again, you can always make a factors list, you guys, to help you out. The only combination that will give us negative 8, you guys, I forgot to put plus and minus for all these, would be this option. If both the 2 and the 6 were both negative. Look at that, right? Negative times negative 2 times negative 6 is positive 12. Good. And when you add them together, you guys, it gives you negative 8. So we're going to get x minus 2 times x minus 6, and those two is our two factors. So it takes a little while, but it's all about the x game, right? Let's take a look at D. Coefficients, x game. Our first and third coefficient, multiply them together. 1 times 6 is 6. And put our second coefficient on the bottom, our b value. So same thing. Factors list, 1, 6, 2, 3. So which one of these two, when you add them together, it gives you the bottom, or the second coefficient. And it has to be 2 and 3, right? 2 times 3 gives you guys 6. When you add 2 and 3 together, you guys get 5. So our factors are x plus 2 times x plus 3. E. So this one gets a little trickier because, do you guys remember in the very beginning of our lesson, the first step in factoring is to always factor out the GCF if you can. If you can. So let's take a look at this problem then, you guys, that we just had. I see a 2, I see a negative 12, and I see a negative 80, right? Can't I factor out a 2 from every single one of those numbers first? 2 can go into all of those, right? When you divide them, so we have 2. We can factor out 2 from each one. 2 divided by 2, 1. So this is just going to be 1x squared. Negative 12 divided by 2, negative 6. Don't forget the x. Negative 80 divided by 2, negative 40. And then you guys just focus on inside of the parentheses. Inside the parentheses, the coefficient is a is equal to 1, The second coefficient is negative 6, and the third coefficient, you guys, is negative 40. So we could do our x game, right? A times c, or our first and our third coefficient times each other, is negative 40. Our second coefficient, or b value, is negative 6. So what are all the factors of negative 40? 1 and negative 40, 2 and, oh, not negative 40, just plus or minus 2 and 20, plus or minus 4 and 10, plus and minus 5 and 8. So which combination would give us, if you add them together, negative 6? And that is, again, the 4, that was 4, and this was negative 10. So don't forget to drop the 2 that we factored out in the beginning, and then for us, you guys, we're going to have x plus 4, and then x minus 10. So with some problems, you can have a greatest common factor. You do that first, and then you factor the trinomial. Are you always going to have a greatest common factor? No, but it's just always, it's something to just always look out for. F, I see negative 3, negative 15, negative 18, you guys. I know I can factor out a 3 from each one, and since the first one is a negative sign, I have to factor out a negative. So negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3, you guys, is positive 1. So 1x squared for x squared. Negative 15 divided by negative 3 is positive 5. Don't forget your x term. And negative 18 divided by negative 3, you guys, is positive 6. And then we factor this out, you guys. So, right, our first coefficient's 1, our second one's 5, our third one is 6. So, x game, right? A times c, 6. Our b value, our second coefficient, is 5. What two things multiply to give you 6, but when you guys add them together, it gives you 5? That's 2 and 3. So, don't forget to drop our GCF, negative 3, and then our factors for the quadratic, x plus 2, and then, oops, that's falling, x plus 8, 3. And again, gonna constantly remind you guys to rate yourself, right? Make sure you guys rate yourself so that I know and you also know what you do get and what you don't get, right? I'm gonna remind you guys constantly about that because, again, it will help you in the long run. So we did do some doyos in class, and do these on your own time. You can pause the video if you want to try it out for yourself, but for this one, you guys, you should have gotten 48 up top, 14 on the bottom. The two numbers that multiply to 48, but when added together gives you 14. That is, let me see, 2 and 24, no. 3 and no. 4, no. 6 and 7, no. 6 and 8. This one's 6 and 8, you guys. If you don't believe me, look at your factors list. 1 and 48, 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12, 6 and 8. So 6 plus 8, you guys, is 14. So our factors are x plus 6 times x plus 8. For 2, this one, you guys, if you guys did your x method, negative 24 up top, 5 on the bottom. What two things multiply to the top, but when added gives you guys the bottom? That is going to be 8 and negative 3. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. 8 plus negative 3, you guys, is positive 5. So x plus 8, x minus 3. These could be vice versa. So you could write x minus 3 and x plus 8. It does not matter because multiplication is commutative, meaning one can come before the other. Order does not matter. And this one, you guys could have factored out a GCF from all of them. So you could have factored out a negative 2 for x squared minus x plus 6. And then you do the factoring trinomials inside the parentheses. X method, what two things multiply to 6, but when added together gives you negative 1. And if you guys did it, it would have been negative 3 and positive 2. So don't forget the GCF, negative 2 times x minus 3, and x plus 2. And of course, do an exit ticket summary, you guys. Summarize what you learned today, because it's always good to know what do you remember about a lesson, right? What do you remember about a lesson? So hopefully this was helpful for you guys. Rewatch this as much as you guys like, and if you have questions, always ask me and let me know. Okay, good luck everyone. Our school year is just on its way.